The primacy of attention. The cornerstone of sound reasoning lies in paying meticulous attention. While technical proficiency in logic and critical thinking frameworks is valuable, it is our attentiveness to detail, our willingness to observe without prejudice, that truly elevates our thinking. The French philosopher René Descartes' famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," often hailed as a model of philosophical argumentation, is in fact a testament to the power of focused observation. Descartes' rigorous examination of his own experience, his relentless questioning of what could and could not be doubted, ultimately led him to the irrefutable realization of his own consciousness. This process was not primarily one of constructing logical arguments, but of attending closely to the nuances of his subjective experience. Attention extends beyond the confines of our own minds. It necessitates a genuine engagement with the world around us, and crucially, with the experiences of others. To truly understand complex issues, we must listen attentively to diverse perspectives, particularly those often marginalized or silenced. This is evident in the burgeoning field of social epistemology, which highlights the critical role of testimony in knowledge formation. The experiences and voices of those most impacted by issues like racism, sexism, and patient agency are invaluable sources of insight. However, listening is not synonymous with blind acceptance. Engaging with others' perspectives involves critical evaluation, respectful disagreement, and recognition that even within a group, there can be a diversity of viewpoints. The practice of attention demands effort and patience. It is not a passive process, but an active stretching towards understanding. Equipping ourselves with tools like logic, scientific literacy, and statistical reasoning can sharpen our focus and guide our observations. But ultimately, it is the commitment to concentrating deeply that yields the most significant rewards. The art of questioning. Just as vital as attention is the ability to question effectively. The simple act of questioning everything without discernment or purpose can lead us down dangerous paths, as exemplified by the flawed reasoning of flat earthers and conspiracy theorists. Skillful questioning involves recognizing which questions are worth asking, how to frame them properly, and what constitutes a valid answer. A significant pitfall in questioning is the tendency to ask loaded questions, those that presuppose the truth of what is in dispute. These rhetorical tactics, common in political discourse and everyday conversations, aim to manipulate rather than illuminate. Furthermore, we often fall into the trap of asking the wrong questions altogether. Entrenched in established paradigms, we fail to consider alternative perspectives or investigate less traveled intellectual terrains. This intellectual inertia can lead to stagnation and a failure to address truly pressing issues. One of the most potent, yet often misused, questions in philosophy is, how do you know? While this question is essential for critical inquiry, its relentless application to every claim can lead to paralyzing skepticism, the belief that nothing can truly be known. It is crucial to recognize that certainty is often an unattainable standard. Instead, our questioning should aim to test the strength of our beliefs, acknowledging that our knowledge is always provisional, subject to revision in light of new evidence or insights. Questioning must not solely focus on finding faults and flaws. It should also involve seeking out strengths, benefits, and alternative interpretations. A relentless focus on the negative can blind us to the potential merits of an idea or the even more significant flaws in its alternatives. Crucially, we must be willing to question our own motives, agendas, and even our character when engaging in critical inquiry. Are we genuinely seeking truth or simply trying to score points, defend our preconceptions, or revel in our intellectual superiority? The value of self-doubt. Perhaps one of the most important aspects of questioning is the willingness to question our own assumptions, especially those that appear obvious or are taken for granted. History is replete with examples of obvious truths that have been overturned, from the geocentric model of the universe to the denial of women's suffrage. Philosophers, by their very nature, are trained to challenge such seemingly self-evident claims, probing the foundations of our beliefs about the self, the world, and our place within it. Simon Critchley's thought-provoking challenge to Kant's axiom, "Ought implies can," exemplifies the power of constructive questioning. By suggesting that we should strive to do more than is possible, Critchley does not advocate for the impossible, but pushes us to confront the limits of our ethical thinking and aspire to greater moral heights. His questioning is not aimed at dismantling established ethical principles, but at refining and deepening our understanding of them. The aggregation fallacy, the assumption that more of a good thing is always better, is another common pitfall in our thinking. By questioning this seemingly innocuous premise, we can expose the flawed logic behind excessive consumption, over-reliance on supplements, and the relentless pursuit of economic growth at the expense of social well-being. Questioning assumptions is not about discarding ideas, but about refining our understanding. Hume's exploration of causation, for example, did not lead him to reject the concept altogether, but to appreciate its limitations and the role it plays in shaping our understanding of the world. Similarly, questioning religious belief need not be a hostile endeavor aimed at dismantling faith. A more constructive approach would investigate the nature of religious experience, the reasons behind people's beliefs, and the role of faith in their lives. Such an inquiry, while potentially challenging, can lead to a more nuanced understanding of religion, even if it does not result in conversion or deconversion. The importance of philosophical hygiene. Regular self-reflection and a willingness to question our own beliefs and practices are essential for intellectual honesty and growth. While excessive self-doubt can be debilitating, a healthy dose of skepticism, particularly towards our most cherished beliefs, helps us avoid complacency and arrogance. This is especially vital for philosophers who pride themselves on their critical thinking abilities. To exempt their own beliefs or practices from scrutiny would be intellectually inconsistent and undermine the very foundations of their discipline. In a culture increasingly dominated by a cult of positivity and a reluctance to challenge assumptions, the virtues of critical thinking are more important than ever. By cultivating the habits of attentive observation and constructive questioning, we can equip ourselves with the intellectual tools necessary to navigate the complexities of our world, challenge harmful ideologies, and contribute to a more informed and just society. Reasoning well. Good reasoning is not simply a matter of knowing lots of facts or having impressive qualifications. Anyone, regardless of their background, can enhance their reasoning skills by adopting some key philosophical habits. Embrace eclecticism. Effective reasoning necessitates drawing upon knowledge from various sources. Relying solely on a limited group of experts, such as economists, can restrict our understanding, especially when dealing with multifaceted issues like inequality. While economists can provide valuable insights into the financial implications of different policies, they may not be equipped to address questions of dignity, social cohesion, or the broader societal impact of those policies. A comprehensive assessment of any issue often requires insights from various disciplines, such as political science, history, sociology, and psychology. Just as oncologists specialize in cancer, seeking a range of expert opinions helps to avoid narrow perspectives. Similarly, consulting multiple critics in art broadens our understanding due to the inherent subjectivity of taste and biases. The history of philosophy reveals a tradition of eclecticism, with notable figures like Aristotle, Descartes, and Hume making contributions across multiple fields. However, with the increasing specialization in academia, the pursuit of knowledge has become compartmentalized. While specialization has benefits in managing the vast and ever-expanding body of knowledge, it should not lead to intellectual silos. The ideal approach involves a balance between specialized expertise and the ability to connect and synthesize information from different domains. One way to cultivate an eclectic approach is to engage in interdisciplinary collaborations. For instance, tackling complex ethical challenges like those posed by new technologies can be more effectively addressed by bringing together experts from various fields. However, it is crucial to maintain rigorous standards across disciplines and avoid superficial summaries of research that merely confirm preconceived notions. Furthermore, it is essential to acknowledge and learn from existing knowledge in other fields, avoiding the pitfall of reinventing the wheel. Assuming that a particular area of inquiry is entirely novel can lead to overlooking valuable insights from other disciplines. Openness to learning from other fields can lead to a richer and more informed understanding. Openness to insights from outside academia is equally crucial. Philosophers, in particular, can benefit from engaging with thinkers from non-academic backgrounds. While rigorous academic training has its value, it is important to recognize that valuable insights can emerge from outside the confines of the academy. However, venturing beyond one's own area of expertise requires humility and a willingness to acknowledge one's limitations. It is important to carefully research unfamiliar domains to ensure that one's contributions are relevant and well-informed. Beyond specific disciplines, incorporating history into our reasoning is critical. Understanding the historical context of ideas, practices, and events provides valuable insights into their development and significance. For example, examining the evolution of the concept of honor in different historical contexts can illuminate its complexities and nuances. Without a historical lens, our understanding of these concepts can be incomplete and distorted. Scrutinize language. Effective reasoning depends heavily on the careful use of language. The way we use and understand words significantly shapes our thoughts and arguments. Defining terms is fundamental to clear communication and avoiding misunderstandings. In many debates, disagreements arise because participants use the same words with different meanings. For instance, understanding the specific definition of institutional racism, distinct from individual prejudice, is crucial for constructive dialogue on the subject. While dictionaries can provide standard definitions, some concepts like truth or justice require more nuanced analysis. Philosophical debates often center around defining these complex concepts, which can lead to a seemingly paradoxical situation. We need some understanding of a term to define it, but if we already understand it, why define it? This paradox highlights that we learn the meaning of words through their use in language, starting with prototypical examples and gradually extending their application to related concepts. While most words have flexible meanings, precise definitions are crucial in certain contexts. Scientific terms and legal definitions often require strict delimitation to ensure clarity and consistency. However, attempts to impose overly rigid definitions on inherently vague concepts can lead to unnecessary disputes. Recognizing the inherent ambiguity in some words is essential for productive discussions. Advocating for specific definitions requires careful argumentation, not mere stipulation. Simply declaring a particular meaning for a word does not make it universally accepted. Persuasive arguments must be presented to justify the chosen definition. Manipulating language can be a deceptive rhetorical tactic. High redefinition narrows a word's meaning to exclude certain groups, as seen in populist rhetoric that claims to represent the people while excluding dissenting voices. Conversely, low redefinition broadens a word's meaning to encompass a wider range, potentially diluting its original significance. For instance, inflating the number of humanists by including anyone who agrees with a few humanist principles, without considering their stance on the existence of God, misrepresents the term's true meaning. Identifying the intended role of a word can help to resolve disputes about its definition. Instead of fixating on finding the one true meaning, focusing on the purpose the word serves in a specific context can clarify discussions. For example, the debate about transgender rights involves considering whether terms like man and woman should primarily reflect biological or social distinctions. While clarity is crucial, precision can sometimes require specialized language. Technical jargon can be off-putting, but it often serves a necessary purpose in making subtle distinctions that everyday language cannot capture. However, it is important to avoid unnecessary jargon and use common language whenever possible. Category mistakes occur when we miscategorize the nature of something, often due to misleading language. For example, thinking of the cloud as a single entity rather than a distributed network of servers is a category mistake. Similarly, conceiving of the mind as a non-physical object inside the head, rather than a capacity for thought and consciousness, is another example. To avoid being misled by language, it is crucial to pay close attention to the associations and implications that words carry. Asking ourselves, "Does this mean what I think it means?" can help to identify potential biases and distortions introduced by language. While precision is valuable, taking language too literally can lead to misinterpretations. Understanding the intended meaning of phrases like "read someone the riot act" requires recognizing their non-literal usage. Similarly, interpreting religious language exclusively through a literal lens can lead to simplistic conclusions about its truth or falsity. Metaphorical language plays a significant role in shaping our understanding of the world. While it is essential to distinguish metaphors from literal statements, recognizing the pervasiveness of metaphorical thinking can help to avoid taking them as straightforward facts. However, it is generally preferable to speak directly when discussing ideas, avoiding unnecessary digressions or obscure language. The limitations of language should also be acknowledged. Different languages categorize experience in distinct ways, highlighting the arbitrariness of word meanings. While words aim to capture the essence of reality, they inevitably fall short. Recognizing these limitations helps to avoid mistaking words for the reality they represent. Even within a single language, words like meaning can have multiple interpretations. Breaking down complex concepts into their constituent parts is crucial for clarifying discussions about abstract ideas like the meaning of life. Confusing words with the things they represent can lead to flawed arguments. The ontological argument for God's existence exemplifies this fallacy by equating the concept of a perfect being with its actual existence. This mistake highlights the need to remember that language is a tool for representing reality, not reality itself. Follow the facts. Effective reasoning requires grounding our beliefs in evidence and carefully considering the implications of those beliefs. While deductive arguments provide certainty, inductive reasoning, based on observation and experience, always carries some degree of uncertainty. Our data is inevitably limited, and generalizing from past observations to future predictions always involves a leap of faith. Recognizing the inherent limitations of inductive reasoning can help to avoid overconfidence in our beliefs. Despite its uncertainty, inductive reasoning is essential for navigating the world. While we cannot be certain that the sun will rise tomorrow, the overwhelming evidence from past experience justifies our belief in its likelihood. Similarly, while not every cup of coffee will provide the same effect, our past experiences provide a reasonable basis for expecting a similar outcome. The problem of induction highlights the philosophical challenge of justifying our reliance on past experience to predict the future. While this problem has profound implications for our understanding of knowledge for practical purposes, it underscores the importance of acknowledging the possibility of error in our beliefs. Even expert predictions often fail, demonstrating the limitations of inductive reasoning in complex situations. The interconnectedness and constant change inherent in many phenomena make it difficult to accurately foresee future events. Hume's principle of proportioning our belief to the evidence provides a valuable guideline for navigating uncertainty. While seemingly obvious, this principle is often difficult to apply in practice, particularly when faced with compelling narratives that lack sufficient evidence. The argument from design, which attempts to infer a creator from the order of the universe, exemplifies the dangers of overgeneralizing from experience. While we have experience with human-made objects like watches, extending this analogy to the universe as a whole lacks a comparable evidential basis. Carefully examining the source of claims is essential for assessing their validity. Sensationalized media reports often distort or misrepresent scientific findings, leading to unwarranted fears or conclusions. Meta-induction involves generalizing from a broad category of precedents rather than focusing on specific details. This approach is valuable when dealing with situations where our knowledge of general trends outweighs our understanding of specific cases. For instance, knowing that most illnesses are not serious can help to alleviate anxiety when experiencing new symptoms, without dismissing the need for professional evaluation. Meta-induction can also help to identify unreliable claims, such as miracle cures or wild conspiracy theories, without requiring detailed examination of each instance. By recognizing the common patterns of such claims, we can more effectively assess their credibility. Focusing on general truths and trends is particularly valuable when our knowledge of specific situations is limited. While details matter, overemphasizing them can lead to misguided conclusions, especially when we lack the expertise to interpret them accurately. Seek the best explanation. Abduction, or inference to the best explanation, is a distinct form of inductive reasoning that focuses on identifying the most plausible explanation for a given phenomenon. When faced with multiple possible explanations, abductive reasoning involves evaluating them based on criteria such as simplicity, coherence, comprehensiveness, and testability. The best explanation typically strikes a balance between these criteria, avoiding overly simplistic accounts that lack explanatory power and overly complex explanations that introduce unnecessary assumptions. While simplicity is a desirable characteristic of explanations, it should not be pursued at the expense of explanatory adequacy. Occam's razor, which encourages choosing the simplest explanation, should be applied judiciously, considering the complexity of the phenomenon being explained. Conspiracy theories often exhibit a deceptive coherence and comprehensiveness, making them appealing but ultimately implausible. While they offer seemingly unified accounts, they typically require attributing unrealistic levels of power and control to hidden actors. Elegance, though often associated with truth, can sometimes be misleading. Explanations that prioritize elegance may overlook the messiness and complexities inherent in reality. Formal distinctions between different types of arguments, such as deductive, inductive, and abductive, can be helpful, but should not overshadow the fundamental question of whether a conclusion logically follows from its premises. In practice, our reasoning often blends elements of these different types, and focusing on the coherence and consistency of arguments can provide a more practical guide to sound reasoning. By cultivating these philosophical habits, eclecticism, linguistic scrutiny, a commitment to evidence, and a discerning approach to explanations, we can significantly enhance our reasoning abilities and navigate the complexities of the world more effectively. These skills empower us to make more informed decisions, critically evaluate claims, and engage in more meaningful discussions. Be a psychologist. One of the key insights of philosophy is that to think well, you need to understand how the human mind works. After all, we are the ones doing the thinking, and for much of our history, psychology was considered a branch of philosophy. Thinkers like David Hume, for instance, explored the nature of causation and ethics, but their inquiries were as much about how we think as about how the world works. But over time, psychology split off from philosophy, to the detriment of both disciplines. Psychology, with its focus on the scientific study of the mind, became hesitant to tackle questions about how we should think. This has left a void that has often been filled by those less qualified. For philosophy, the separation has meant a disconnect from the very subject. It seeks to understand the human mind. To truly think like a philosopher, we need to bridge this gap and bring psychology back into the fold. This means recognizing that our thinking is not always purely rational. It's often shaped by emotions, prejudices, and biases. We need to be aware of these limitations and develop strategies for mitigating their influence. One common tool philosophers use is the thought experiment. These are hypothetical scenarios designed to test our beliefs and intuitions. For example, imagine a teletransporter that can scan your body, destroy it, and create a perfect copy of you on another planet. Would you survive this process? Thought experiments like this force us to confront our assumptions about personal identity and what it means to be human. But we must be cautious with thought experiments. They can be very effective at eliciting our intuitions, but intuitions are not always reliable guides to truth. Our intuitions can be misleading, especially when they are influenced by emotion or prejudice. We should therefore treat thought experiments as tools for generating arguments, not as arguments in themselves. The goal is not to simply pump out intuitions, but to subject them to rational scrutiny. This principle applies not just to thought experiments, but to all our hypothetical reasoning. When we imagine alternative possibilities, we need to be careful not to mistake the bounds of our imaginations for what is actually possible or likely. Moral reasoning. Thought experiments are often used in moral philosophy, where they can help us to explore our moral intuitions and try to formulate general principles. But we need to be careful not to simply assume that our reactions to specific cases reveal robust moral principles. Our moral intuitions are often shaped by what psychologists call System 1-inch thinking, fast, intuitive, and unconscious. Philosophers, on the other hand, tend to favor System 2 inches thinking, slow, rational, and conscious. The challenge is to find a way to integrate these two systems of thought. Some moral philosophers try to do this by starting with System 1 intuitions, and then using System 2 to extract rational principles from them. Others reject this approach, arguing that we should rely solely on System 2 and disregard our intuitions. Both approaches have their problems. Relying solely on System 1 can lead to moral principles that are arbitrary and inconsistent. And relying solely on System 2 can lead to a sterile and unmotivating morality. A more promising approach is to recognize that emotions can themselves be reasons for action. As philosopher T.M. Scanlon has argued, emotions such as anger and resentment are often bound up with judgments that are open to rational scrutiny. For example, if you are resentful because someone has taken credit for your work, your resentment might be justified. But if you are resentful because someone is more successful than you, your resentment might be nothing more than envy. By carefully examining our emotions, we can begin to understand the reasons behind them and determine whether they are justified. The ideal is to strive for a harmony between our emotions and our beliefs. When these are in conflict, it indicates a failure of both thinking and feeling. For instance, if you believe in gender equality, but you still find yourself treating women as inferior, you haven't fully grasped the meaning of equality. Your thinking needs to be more deeply integrated with your feeling. The importance of psychology. A good understanding of psychology is also essential for navigating the complexities of human behavior. We often need to predict how people will act, both individually and collectively. And while we can hope that people will change for the better, it is often more realistic to assume that they will continue to behave as they have in the past, unless there is clear evidence to the contrary. Consider someone who has started and failed at multiple businesses. If they start a new venture, it is reasonable to be skeptical about their chances of success. While it is possible they have learned from their mistakes, the onus is on them to prove that this time is different. Giving people the benefit of the doubt is an act of generosity, not rationality. Psychology has also taught us that our thinking is often distorted by cognitive biases. These are systematic errors in our reasoning that can lead us to make poor judgments. One of the most common and pervasive biases is confirmation bias, or my side bias, which is the tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms our existing beliefs. This bias can be especially strong when we are dealing with emotionally charged issues. For example, someone who believes in the efficacy of an unproven herbal remedy might latch on to every anecdote of someone who got better after taking it, while ignoring all the evidence to the contrary. They might also ignore the fact that most people get better over time anyway, regardless of what they do. Confirmation bias leads us to see what we want to see, even when the evidence is weak or non-existent. Philosophers, despite their training in rigorous reasoning, are not immune to confirmation bias. In fact, their advanced reasoning skills can sometimes make the problem worse, as they become more adept at rationalizing away any evidence that contradicts their beliefs. As David Hume observed centuries ago, philosophy can sometimes foster a predominant inclination and push the mind towards that side, which already draws too much by the bias and propensity of the natural temper. Another insidious bias is implicit bias. This is the unconscious influence of stereotypes and prejudices on our judgments and actions. Implicit bias can affect even the most well-intentioned people, and it can have a real impact on how we treat others. To combat cognitive biases, we need to develop self-awareness and be willing to challenge our own assumptions. We need to ask ourselves, is this argument really as good as it seems, or is it that I want it to be so? We also need to be aware of the potential impact of our own privilege or lack of privilege on our thinking. Psychologizing. While psychology can be a valuable tool for understanding how we think, we should be careful not to overuse it. One common mistake is to psychologize, to assume that we know the hidden psychological motivations behind people's arguments. While it is true that our thinking is often motivated, it is also true that we are not very good at discerning the motivations of others. And even if we could accurately identify someone's motivations, it would not necessarily invalidate their argument. A good argument is a good argument, regardless of the motives behind it. Instead of trying to psychoanalyze our opponents, we should focus on evaluating their arguments on their own merits. We should consider the evidence they present, the logic of their reasoning, and the plausibility of their conclusions. If an argument is flawed, we should be able to point out its flaws, regardless of the arguer's psychological state. Know what matters. One of the hallmarks of a good thinker is the ability to discern what matters from what doesn't. This is essential for focusing our attention and making good judgments. In philosophy, this means being able to distinguish between genuine philosophical problems and mere intellectual puzzles. It's like the difference between a challenging hike that leads to a breathtaking vista and a pointless walk around the block. Too often, we get caught up in thinking about things that are ultimately trivial. We spend hours debating the precise definition of a term, when the definition doesn't really matter for the larger point we are trying to make. Or we get bogged down in technical details, when the bigger picture is what's important. A critical thinker is always asking, is this really what I should be thinking about? They are constantly evaluating the significance of their thoughts and making sure that they are focusing their attention on what is truly important. Of course, what matters is relative to the context. What matters in a debate about climate change, for instance, might be different from what matters in a discussion about free will. And what matters for one person might not matter for another. To determine what matters in any given situation, we need to pay close attention to the issues at stake and the interests of the various parties involved. We also need to be aware of our own biases and assumptions, and how they might be influencing our judgments. The ability to see an issue from the point of view of others is crucial for determining what matters. It allows us to understand why people might disagree with us, and it can help us to refine our own beliefs. Another important skill is being able to identify the hidden influences that might be shaping our thinking. These influences can come from a variety of sources, including our social networks, our professional environments, and even our own personal histories. By becoming aware of these influences, we can begin to mitigate their impact on our thinking. Straw men and the principle of charity. One of the most common pitfalls in reasoning is the straw man fallacy. This is the tactic of misrepresenting an opponent's argument in order to make it easier to attack. For example, someone might argue against vaccine mandates by claiming that they amount to forced injections, when in reality most mandates simply require people to be vaccinated if they want to access certain services or participate in certain activities. By distorting the argument in this way, the critic is able to score a cheap victory over a position that no one actually holds. To avoid straw men, we should always try to engage with the best, strongest version of our opponent's argument. This is known as the principle of charity. The principle of charity requires us to treat our opponents as rational agents who are capable of offering good reasons for their beliefs, even when we disagree with those beliefs. Applying the principle of charity can be challenging, especially when we are dealing with views that we find offensive or repugnant. But it is essential for having productive and respectful disagreements. When we assume that our opponents are simply stupid or evil, we close ourselves off to the possibility of learning from them. Applying the principle of charity can also help us to better understand our own beliefs. By forcing ourselves to engage with the best arguments against our own views, we can test the strength of our convictions and identify any weaknesses in our reasoning. Error theories. When we encounter people who hold beliefs that we believe to be false, it is natural to wonder how they could be so wrong. One way to approach this question is to develop an error theory. An error theory is an explanation for why someone might hold a false belief, even though they are intelligent and well-intentioned. A good error theory should be both plausible and charitable. It should explain why the false belief might seem reasonable to the person holding it, and it should avoid attributing the belief to stupidity, malice, or other negative qualities. For example, if someone believes that vaccines are dangerous, a good error theory might point to the fact that they have been exposed to misinformation about vaccines online or in their social networks. Or it might point to the fact that they have a general distrust of authority figures, such as doctors and scientists. These are both plausible and charitable explanations for why someone might hold a false belief about vaccines. Developing error theories can be a valuable exercise, even when we are dealing with beliefs that we find deeply objectionable. It can help us to see the world from the perspective of others, and it can make us more understanding and compassionate in our interactions with them. Intonation and how people believe. To truly understand people, we need to pay attention not just to what they believe, but to how they believe. Two beliefs can have the same semantic content, that is, they can be about the same thing, but they can be held in very different ways. One way to think about this is in terms of intonation. Imagine someone saying the sentence, "Human beings are biological machines." They could say this with a sense of awe and wonder, or they could say it with a tone of despair and resignation. The content of the belief is the same in both cases, but the way in which it is held is very different. Another way to think about how people believe is in terms of the distinction between intuitive beliefs and reflective beliefs. Intuitive beliefs are those that we hold deeply and that guide our actions in the world. For example, we believe that fire burns, so we avoid touching it. Reflective beliefs, on the other hand, are those that we assent to intellectually, but that don't have much of an impact on our behavior. For example, we might believe that it is wrong to eat meat, but we still enjoy a steak from time to time. The distinction between intuitive and reflective beliefs can help us to understand why people sometimes hold beliefs that seem to contradict their actions. For example, someone might sincerely believe that all human life is sacred, but they might also support the death penalty. This apparent contradiction might be explained by the fact that their belief in the sanctity of human life is a reflective belief, while their support for the death penalty is based on a more intuitive belief about the need for punishment. Insight. To be a truly good thinker, you need more than just the ability to process arguments and understand the reasoning of others. You also need insight. Insight is the ability to see things that others have missed, to grasp the essence of a problem, and to come up with creative solutions. Insight is not a mystical quality. It is a skill that can be developed through practice. By cultivating the virtues of good reasoning such as intellectual humility, open-mindedness, and the principle of charity, we can train our minds to see the world more clearly and to make better judgments. One of the hallmarks of insight is the ability to identify what really matters in a given situation. This is not always easy, as we are often bombarded with information and opinions that can distract us from the core issues. But by developing a good nose for what is important, we can avoid wasting our time on trivialities and focus our attention on what is truly significant. Lose your ego. Perhaps the greatest obstacle to clear thinking is our own ego. Our ego can lead us to become attached to our beliefs, even when they are wrong. It can make us resistant to new ideas and unwilling to change our minds. And it can make us more concerned with being right than with finding the truth. To think well, we need to be able to detach ourselves from our ego and to approach problems with a sense of humility and open-mindedness. We need to be willing to admit when we are wrong and to learn from others, even those who disagree with us. One way to cultivate intellectual humility is to recognize the limitations of our own knowledge and understanding. We should be aware of our biases, our blind spots, and the ways in which our thinking might be influenced by our personal experiences and our social networks. We should also be willing to change our minds when the evidence demands it. This can be difficult, as our beliefs often form a part of our identity. But holding on to a belief simply because it is ours is a form of intellectual dishonesty. The goal of thinking should be to arrive at the truth, not to defend our own ego. And sometimes, the truth will require us to let go of beliefs that we have held dear for a long time. Another way to lose our ego is to avoid taking ourselves too seriously. Philosophy is a serious subject, but it doesn't mean we can't approach it with a sense of playfulness and humor. Laughter can be a powerful tool for deflating our ego and for reminding us of our own fallibility. Ultimately, losing our ego is about recognizing that we are not the center of the universe. Our ideas are not necessarily the most important ideas, and our perspective is not the only valid perspective. By stepping outside of our own ego, we can open ourselves up to a wider range of perspectives and ideas, and we can begin to see the world more clearly as it truly is, rather than as we would like it to be. By developing the skills and habits of mind of a philosopher, we can become better thinkers, better decision makers, and better human beings. Thinking for yourself with others. Thinking well requires engaging with other people and ideas, while maintaining the critical distance necessary to avoid uncritically accepting the consensus view. It's common in Western culture to view thinking as a solitary activity, exemplified by the image of the lone genius working in isolation. However, this perspective overlooks the essential role of social interaction in fostering intellectual growth. Engaging with diverse perspectives not only expands our knowledge base, but also helps us identify and challenge our own assumptions, leading to more robust and well-founded conclusions. Thinking in a community. The notion of the solitary thinker is deeply ingrained in Western culture, as exemplified by the admiration for Robinson Crusoe's self-sufficiency. This individualistic approach to thinking extends to academia, where philosophy, science, and the arts are often portrayed as pursuits of lone geniuses. However, this perspective neglects the significant cognitive benefits that come from engaging with others. Philosopher David Chalmers uses the analogy of Robinson Crusoe returning to society to illustrate this point. While Crusoe could accomplish more on the island due to his isolation, his overall capacity was limited. Upon rejoining society, his individual capabilities may have decreased, but his potential expanded significantly due to his connection with others. This concept is further supported by social cognition research, which demonstrates that people are smarter when they think together. For example, the Watson selection task, a classic experiment in abstract reasoning, shows that individuals struggle to implement a simple logical rule in an abstract context. However, when groups work together on the same task, their success rate increases significantly. This suggests that leaving our cognitive islands and engaging with others enhances our reasoning abilities. The social dimension of knowledge. The importance of social interaction in shaping knowledge is also recognized in the field of social epistemology, which studies the social aspects of belief formation and justification. While it's true that social factors can sometimes hinder objectivity, as seen in cases where industries fund research to support their agendas, it's crucial to acknowledge the positive contributions of social interaction to knowledge acquisition. As Alvin Goldman, a pioneer in social epistemology, points out, drawing on the experiences and knowledge of others can significantly enhance our understanding. Others may have different ideas, better education, or more exposure to a particular subject, providing valuable insights that we might otherwise miss. A historical examination of philosophy further demonstrates the importance of social engagement. While lone geniuses may exist, they are exceptions, not the rule. The most influential philosophers have often combined solitary reflection with deep engagement with other brilliant minds. From Aristotle's practice of reviewing existing ideas in his lectures to the modern practice of peer review, the advancement of understanding has been driven by communities of thinkers challenging and refining each other's ideas. This suggests that thinking outside of our own heads is essential for intellectual growth, as the world's greatest thinking has often emerged from the interaction of diverse perspectives. Just as a music lover would be foolish to listen only to their own compositions, those seeking to reason well should engage with arguments from various sources, including those from different cultures. Expanding our mental horizons. One way to broaden our thinking is to engage with perspectives from outside our own culture. Bhikkhu Parekh, a British political theorist, argues that multiculturalism is essential for intellectual growth. He posits that no single culture possesses a monopoly on wisdom, and therefore, engaging in dialogue with other cultures allows us to become aware of our own assumptions, strengths, and weaknesses, leading to a richer understanding of the world. History supports Parekh's view, as the flourishing of philosophy often occurred in places where ideas flowed freely between cultures. Ancient Athens, as well as 18th century Paris, Amsterdam, and Edinburgh, were all vibrant trading hubs that fostered intellectual exchange. In these settings, formal and informal gatherings provided opportunities for individuals with diverse intellectual backgrounds to engage in thought-provoking discussions. It's important to note that Parekh advocates for interactive multiculturalism, emphasizing that true engagement involves challenging and questioning different worldviews rather than simply celebrating diversity without critical examination. This interactive element is crucial for ensuring that the plurality of cultures is treated with respect and seen as worthy of learning from. Thinking with others, even when alone. While direct interaction with others is valuable, even when alone, we can benefit from considering other perspectives. Many people find themselves internalizing the viewpoints of those they know, such as family members, colleagues, or partners. Consciously conjuring these voices, as in the Christian practice of asking, "What would Jesus do?" can also help us to see situations from different angles. Novelists often experience this phenomenon as they inhabit the minds of their characters. Rebecca Goldstein, for example, describes how she came up with the idea of a mattering map, while writing from the perspective of a character who was significantly different from herself. By stepping outside of her own point of view, she was able to access a new way of thinking about what matters in life. The dangers of conformity. While engaging with others is essential for intellectual growth, it's crucial to be aware of the dangers of excessive conformity. In some cases, the collective mind can become more of a prison than a liberation, as seen in situations where state oppression or groupthink stifle independent thought. In China, for example, the article "Practice is the only criterion for judging the truth," published in 1978, marked a turning point for philosophical inquiry. Prior to this, academic philosophy was subservient to the thoughts of political leaders, lacking independent status. This article's emphasis on the importance of practice in judging truth and the need for revision and development of knowledge, including Marxism, represented a significant shift towards thought liberation. In the West, the threat of stifling conformity often arises from groupthink. a phenomenon where groups prioritize consensus over critical evaluation of alternative viewpoints. This can lead to poor decision-making, as seen in historical examples like the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Groupthink can not only solidify opinions, but also push them towards extremes. While critical thinking can help to mitigate groupthink, it's not a foolproof solution. Philosophy, often considered a bastion of independent thought, is not immune to groupthink, as evidenced by the various schools of thought that have emerged throughout its history. The tendency for consensus to form within communities of interest highlights the need to be vigilant against unintentional conformity. Navigating the tension between independence and conformity. The ideal approach to thinking lies in finding a balance between excessive independence and conformity to the group. This ideal point is not fixed and can vary depending on the context. Sometimes independent thinking may require taking a dissenting stance, while in other situations, it may involve carefully considering the consensus view. Richard Swinburne, a philosopher who holds minority views on topics like the immaterial soul and the existence of God, exemplifies independent thinking. He prioritizes truth and is open to learning from others, but ultimately follows the arguments wherever they lead, even if they result in dissenting opinions. The Maverick's Paradox. The case of Swinburne highlights what might be called the Maverick's Paradox. Mavericks are right to follow evidence and arguments rather than the herd, but in doing so, they often arrive at incorrect conclusions. This apparent paradox stems from the fact that truth is not determined by majority rule. However, when dissenting from a consensus view supported by competent experts, it is important to provide justification for the dissenting opinion. In cases where expertise and evidence exist, the burden of proof lies on the dissenter to demonstrate why the prevailing view is incorrect. This principle is based on the assumption that majority opinion often reflects the judgment of the most knowledgeable individuals based on the most comprehensive evidence available. The onus of proof. The concept of the onus of proof is crucial for determining when it's reasonable to accept a dissenting view. While it's essential to remain open to argument, it's generally unwise to adopt a dissenting opinion without sufficient justification. This approach is not simply going along with the crowd, but rather giving due weight to expert consensus. There are, however, instances where the onus of proof shifts from the dissenter to the upholders of the status quo. Janet Radcliffe Richards argues that in politics and public policy, if a policy causes clear harm, it should be considered unjustified until proven otherwise, placing the burden of proof on those defending the policy. This challenges the conservative view that change always requires stronger justification than maintaining the status quo. Radcliffe Richards contends that the principle of caution should not be applied universally, and when a policy demonstrably causes harm, the onus of proof should shift to those defending it. Examples of this can be seen in policies that historically excluded women from certain professions, such as firefighting, based on unfounded assumptions about physical strength. Evaluating expertise. Given the unavoidable reliance on expert knowledge, a crucial question arises. How do we know which experts to trust when we lack the expertise to judge their expertise? To address this challenge, a process of epistemological triage can be employed. This involves assessing the credibility of claims to expert knowledge by considering three key factors: the domain of expertise, the relevant experts, and the trustworthiness of the specific expert in question. First, it's important to determine whether the claimed expertise falls within a domain where genuine expertise exists. For example, in the case of COVID-19 denial, claims that the virus is not real can be readily addressed by established expertise in virology, public health, medicine, and hospital management. Second, once the relevant domain of expertise is identified, it's crucial to identify the appropriate experts within that domain. While a physicist or chemist may hold advanced degrees, their expertise may not extend to virology or medicine. Therefore, it's essential to seek out experts who are specifically qualified in the relevant field. Finally, even within a legitimate domain of expertise, it's important to assess the trustworthiness of the individual expert. This involves examining their credentials, track record, and potential biases. Avoiding undifferentiated expertise. The rejection of undifferentiated expertise is crucial for combating the decline in respect for experts, a trend fueled by populist distrust of elites. While it's important to acknowledge the potential for arrogance among elites, as Jacques Rancière points out, the problem lies not with expertise itself, but with the monopoly of expertise, the notion that only one type of expertise holds validity. This elitist approach undermines democratic decision-making, which relies on considering a plurality of expert perspectives. The case of Andrew Wakefield and the MMR vaccine controversy highlights the importance of scrutinizing expert claims. Despite Wakefield's credentials as a physician and academic, his claims linking the MMR vaccine to autism exceeded his expertise. His paper, published in The Lancet, did not establish a causal link, and his subsequent calls for a suspension of the MMR jab were widely condemned by his peers. The Wakefield case demonstrates the need to inoculate ourselves against bad thinking. Even seemingly credible experts can make claims that go beyond their area of expertise or present findings based on insufficient evidence. It's crucial to critically evaluate expert claims, considering the strength of the evidence, potential biases, and the consensus view within the relevant field. The limits of expertise. While expertise is essential for navigating complex issues, it's crucial to recognize that even genuine experts have limitations. They should not be treated as infallible oracles, and their opinions should be subject to critical evaluation. In some cases, the boundaries of expertise may be unclear, as in fields like psychotherapy or neuro-linguistic programming, where qualifications and accreditations may not guarantee validity. Despite the need for critical engagement with expertise, it's important to acknowledge the inevitability of trust in our interactions with others. As Honora O'Neill points out, the idea of a trust-free life is a childish illusion. In many aspects of life, including evaluating expertise, we rely on imperfect evidence and must make judgments based on our best assessment of the available information. Avoiding acolytes. The importance of critical engagement with expertise extends to our interactions with individuals we admire and respect. While respect for experts and admiration for individuals are valuable, it's crucial to avoid becoming acolytes, blindly accepting their ideas without question. This requires a willingness to challenge even those we hold in high regard, recognizing that loyalty should be reserved for people, not ideas. The dangers of acolytes can be seen in the cult that developed around Ludwig Wittgenstein, a brilliant and charismatic philosopher. His students at Cambridge often mimicked his mannerisms and speech patterns, demonstrating a level of reverence that could hinder independent thinking. Stephen Mulhall, a Wittgenstein admirer, cautions against the trap of ventriloquizing the philosopher, emphasizing the importance of developing one's own voice and perspective. The perils of partisanship. Partisanship can also hinder clear thinking by encouraging blind allegiance to a particular thinker, theory, or school of thought. This can lead to the uncritical application of ideas or the dismissal of entire traditions of thought. Michael Dummett recounts a story about a student who went to study under Edmund Husserl in Freiburg. Upon arriving at Husserl's house, the student was presented with a pile of books representing Husserl's life's work and expected to read them all before returning. While this tradition of discipleship may teach humility and the importance of thorough study, it can also stifle independent thought and critical engagement. In contrast, contemporary Anglophone philosophy emphasizes critical engagement and challenges students to dissect the arguments of great philosophers from the outset. While this approach fosters independent thinking, it can also lead to a dismissive attitude towards classic texts and a lack of appreciation for the depth and complexity of philosophical ideas. Navigating intellectual traditions. Finding a balance between respect for tradition and critical engagement is essential for navigating the complexities of intellectual discourse. While blind adherence to a particular school of thought can limit our understanding, so too can a dismissive attitude towards established traditions. In India, for example, philosophers are often expected to align themselves with one of the various established schools of thought. This formalization of partisanship contrasts with the Western approach, where overt partisanship is generally frowned upon. However, even in the West, subtle forms of partisanship persist, as seen in the divide between analytic and continental philosophy. This split, which emerged in the late 19th century, reflects differing views on the direction of philosophy following Immanuel Kant. Analytic philosophy, dominant in the Anglophone world, emphasizes empirical inquiry and logical analysis, while continental philosophy, prevalent in Germany and France, focuses on the analysis of experience. While the distinction between these traditions may not be as profound as some believe, it has led to institutional divisions that have exacerbated the perceived differences. This partisanship has resulted in the dismissal of entire traditions of thought and hindered the potential for fruitful cross-pollination of ideas. Avoiding cluster thinking. Another manifestation of partisanship is cluster thinking, the tendency to assume that certain beliefs naturally belong together when they are actually independent of each other. This phenomenon is particularly prevalent in politics, where individuals often align themselves with a set of beliefs without critically examining the justifications for each belief. For example, the claim that gay liberation will never happen under capitalism exemplifies cluster thinking. While capitalism may be associated with certain social inequalities, it's not inherently opposed to gay liberation. The corporate embrace of the pink pound demonstrates that capitalist systems can accommodate and even profit from LGBTQ+ rights. Mitchell Onfray criticizes the tendency in left-wing politics to avoid criticizing Islam, highlighting the false dichotomy that often arises from cluster thinking. He argues that rejecting this binary framework allows for a more nuanced and critical engagement with complex issues, avoiding the pitfalls of simplistic us versus them mentalities. Challenging false dichotomies. Cluster thinking often leads to false dichotomies, presenting complex issues as binary choices when in reality, alternative options exist. For example, the framing of environmental concerns as a choice between economic growth and environmental protection presents a false dichotomy. Green growth, driven by increased efficiency and sustainable practices, can allow for both economic development and environmental preservation. Recognizing and challenging false dichotomies is crucial for engaging in nuanced and productive discussions about complex issues. By moving beyond simplistic ether or frameworks, we can explore a wider range of possibilities and develop more effective solutions. The role of theory. While theory can provide valuable frameworks for understanding complex issues, it's essential to avoid forcing our ideas into rigid theoretical pigeonholes. Theories should be treated as tools for exploration and analysis, not as definitive frameworks that dictate our understanding. Slavoj Žižek's critique of liberal multiculturalism provides an example of the potential pitfalls of overly rigid theoretical frameworks. While Žižek's observations about the contradictions inherent in liberal approaches to tolerance are insightful, his reliance on Lacanian psychoanalysis to underpin his arguments can obscure the clarity of his analysis. While theory can add depth to our thinking, it can also become a burden if applied indiscriminately. The limits of isms. The history of philosophy is often presented as a series of isms, with different schools of thought neatly categorized and contrasted. However, this approach can be misleading, as philosophers rarely fit neatly into these categories. For example, the traditional distinction between empiricism and rationalism, while useful for broad categorization, fails to capture the nuances of individual philosophers' views. Descartes, considered a rationalist, often engaged in empirical observation and experimentation, while Hume, an empiricist, developed arguments that relied on logical analysis and a priori reasoning. The problem with labels. The use of labels in philosophy can be problematic for several reasons. First, labels are often applied retrospectively or anachronistically, obscuring the historical context in which philosophical ideas emerged. Second, labels can oversimplify complex ideas, leading to a reductionist understanding of philosophical thought. Finally, the emphasis on labels can foster a competitive mentality, hindering the potential for fruitful collaboration and synthesis of ideas. Contemporary philosophical training can sometimes exacerbate the problem of labels by encouraging students to apply specific theories to particular issues, as if there were a singular, utilitarian, or Kantian view on complex matters. This approach overlooks the diversity of thought within these traditions and reinforces the notion of philosophy as a series of neatly defined camps. Embracing complexity. Joe Wolfe, a contemporary British philosopher, advocates for a more nuanced approach, suggesting that it's unlikely for a well-developed body of thought to be entirely wrong. Instead of dismissing ideas outright, he encourages a critical but charitable engagement, recognizing that even flawed theories may contain valuable insights. Resisting master theories. The tendency to embrace master theories, all-encompassing explanations that purport to explain everything, is another pitfall to avoid. While theories like Ian McGilchrist's work on left and right brain differences or Shoshana Zuboff's concept of surveillance capitalism offer valuable insights, they should not be treated as universal explanations. Every theory has its scope and limits, and attempts to apply them beyond their intended domains can lead to distorted understandings. The value of de-dichotomization. Jonathan Israel, a historian of ideas, highlights the importance of de-dichotomizing rigid polarities in intellectual discourse. He argues that the most significant advancements in thought often occur when thinkers transcend the limitations of binary frameworks and seek to synthesize seemingly opposed perspectives. This process of de-dichotomization relies on soft rationality, an approach that recognizes the nuances and complexities of intellectual debate and seeks to bridge divides rather than entrench them. Finding the right balance. While it's important to avoid excessive reliance on isms and rigid theoretical frameworks, it's also crucial to find a balance between systematization and anarchy in our thinking. Our beliefs should form a coherent set, but this coherence should not come at the expense of intellectual honesty or a willingness to embrace complexity. 20th century Anglophone philosophy, with its emphasis on piecemeal analysis, provides an example of the potential pitfalls of overemphasizing fragmentation. While skepticism towards grand metaphysical systems is understandable, the rejection of any attempt to synthesize ideas can lead to an overly fragmented understanding of the world. The importance of holistic explanations. Rebecca Goldstein and John Searle both emphasize the importance of understanding how philosophical ideas fit together. While individual theories and concepts may be valuable, they gain greater significance when seen as part of a coherent whole. This suggests that, while avoiding overly rigid systems, we should strive to develop a holistic understanding of the world, recognizing the interconnectedness of our ideas and experiences. The limits of reductionism. The emphasis on piecemeal analysis in 20th century philosophy reflects a broader trend towards reductionism in Western thought. The success of science, with its focus on breaking down complex phenomena into their constituent parts, has led to the adoption of reductionist approaches in other disciplines. However, reductionism has its limits, even in science, where the study of complex systems is gaining increasing importance. In philosophy and other non-scientific fields, reductionist approaches can obscure the importance of holistic understanding. Mary Midgley and Iris Murdoch, both critics of reductionism, emphasize the need to consider the whole and avoid simplistic explanations that reduce complex phenomena to a single factor. The dangers of scientism. One extreme form of reductionism is scientism, the belief that the methods of science are the only reliable means of acquiring knowledge. While science has undoubtedly made significant contributions to our understanding of the world, scientism's claim that all knowledge must be scientifically verifiable is ultimately self-defeating. The assertion that only hard facts matter is itself a value judgment, not a scientific fact. Moreover, scientism overlooks the role of facts in non-scientific inquiry. Moral reasoning, for example, often relies on factual claims about the world, such as the biological basis of race or gender, the capacity of animals to feel pain, or the consequences of economic policies. While morality may not be as straightforwardly amenable to scientific inquiry as physics or chemistry, it does not lie entirely beyond the realm of reason. Sam Harris's attempt to ground morality in science exemplifies the limitations of scientism. Harris argues that neuroscience will eventually provide us with the knowledge necessary to maximize human well-being. However, this approach overlooks the non-scientific nature of the fundamental claim that human well-being is the ultimate good. Moreover, it assumes a consensus on what constitutes well-being that simply does not exist, as different individuals and cultures hold varying conceptions of what constitutes a good life. The allure of theory over fact. While scientism emphasizes the importance of facts in practice, many individuals prioritize theory over fact, selectively interpreting evidence to fit their preconceived notions. The allure of theory can lead to a distorted view of reality, where the elegance and simplicity of a model take precedence over the complexities of the real world. Libertarian economists' adherence to Ludwig von Mises's praxeology, a general theory of human action, based on a priori reasoning, exemplifies this tendency. Von Mises's belief that economics could be derived from pure logic independent of empirical observation led to a rigid and ultimately flawed understanding of economic systems. The volatility of stock markets, driven by human emotions and irrational behavior, demonstrates the limitations of purely rational models in understanding complex social phenomena. The importance of evidence and experience. The COVID-19 pandemic provides a contemporary example of the dangers of prioritizing theory over evidence. Governments' reliance on behavioral science to predict public compliance with pandemic restrictions often led to decisions that were at odds with actual public behavior. The UK government's repeated justification for delaying or lifting restrictions based on behavioral science advice, despite evidence of widespread public support for such measures, suggests an over-reliance on theoretical models. The episode serves as a reminder that even seemingly evidence-based theories can be unreliable, especially when applied to unprecedented situations. In complex and evolving circumstances, it's crucial to prioritize empirical observation and adapt theories in light of new evidence. The limits of applied ethics. The application of theory to practical matters is particularly problematic in ethics. The traditional approach to applied ethics, which involves first establishing overarching moral principles and then applying them to specific cases, is often ineffective in real-world situations. This approach suffers from several limitations. First, it assumes agreement on which ethical theory to apply, a consensus that rarely exists in practice. Second, it overlooks the fact that moral reasoning often involves a convergence of views, with individuals from different ethical traditions arriving at similar conclusions. Finally, it can obscure the importance of attending to the specific details of a situation, leading to overly simplistic and impractical moral judgments. The need for a situational approach. Joe Wolfe argues that a more effective approach to ethics involves considering the insights of multiple ethical theories, recognizing that each theory highlights important aspects of our moral lives. He suggests that a comprehensive understanding of ethics must embrace complexity and acknowledge the potential for conflicts and dilemmas. Mary Warnock, a philosopher who chaired government inquiries into education and bioethics, exemplifies the importance of a situational approach to moral reasoning. She emphasizes the need to understand the facts on the ground and consider the specific context of a situation when making moral judgments. This approach, often referred to as situational ethics, allows for a more nuanced and responsive approach to ethical dilemmas. Just war theory, a case study. The application of just war theory to the decision of whether or not to go to war highlights the limitations of a theory-first approach to moral reasoning. Just war theory, a widely accepted framework for evaluating the morality of war, provides a set of principles for assessing both the justification for going to war jus ad bellum and the conduct of war jus in bello. While these principles are generally agreed upon, their application to specific cases is often highly contested. The Second Gulf War provides a compelling example of the complexities of applying just war theory to real-world situations. While arguments could be made in favor of each of the just war principles, the decision to go to war ultimately involved a high-stakes gamble with potentially disastrous consequences. Prioritizing facts over theory. The Second Gulf War case study suggests that in moral reasoning, it's crucial to start with the facts and use theory as a tool for analysis, rather than beginning with abstract principles and attempting to apply them to a complex reality. A theory-first approach can distract us from the specifics of a situation and lead to overly simplistic judgments. The importance of balance and judgment. Throughout our exploration of the principles of good thinking, a recurring theme has been the importance of balance and judgment. Aristotle's doctrine of the mean, which posits that virtue lies between extremes, provides a helpful framework for understanding this concept. Just as virtues like generosity or courage involve finding a balance between excess and deficiency, so too do the virtues of thinking. We can err in our reasoning by being too precise or too vague, too charitable or too dismissive, too independent or too conformist. The key to thinking well lies in cultivating the judgment necessary to apply the principles of critical thinking appropriately in different contexts. The act of good thinking. While there is no single method or algorithm for thinking well, a helpful framework for organizing the principles of good thinking is the ACTIC model: attend, clarify, deconstruct, and connect. This model highlights the key stages involved in the process of thinking things through and provides a useful reminder of the steps we can take to enhance our reasoning abilities. Attend. The first stage, attend, emphasizes the foundational importance of attention in all aspects of good thinking. This involves attending to the evidence, the key concepts, the structure of arguments, the unstated assumptions, the potential biases, and the wider context of the issue at hand. Good thinking requires effort and a willingness to overcome our natural tendency towards cognitive laziness. Clarify. The second stage, clarify, focuses on achieving clarity in our understanding. This involves clearly defining the problem, identifying the relevant facts and concepts, and understanding the structure of the arguments involved. Clarity is essential for avoiding error and ensuring that our reasoning is sound and well-founded. Deconstruct. The third stage, deconstruct, involves breaking down complex issues into their constituent parts, making necessary distinctions, and identifying potential flaws in reasoning. This can involve analyzing the logic of arguments, examining the meanings of key terms, separating intertwined concepts, and scrutinizing the relevance of factual claims. Deconstruction is essential for uncovering hidden assumptions, challenging biases, and ensuring that our thinking is rigorous and thorough. Connect. The final stage, connect, involves synthesizing the insights gained from the previous stages and constructing a coherent understanding of the issue at hand. This requires making connections between different ideas, considering the implications of various perspectives, and developing a holistic view of the problem. Connecting the dots requires careful consideration, intellectual humility, and a willingness to engage with diverse viewpoints. Avoiding hasty conclusions. The A2 model emphasizes that good thinking is a process, not a destination. The key takeaway is to avoid jumping to conclusions and instead engage in a careful and deliberate process of thinking things through. In a world that often prizes speed and efficiency, good thinking requires patience, diligence, and a willingness to embrace complexity. By cultivating the virtues of attention, clarity, deconstruction, and connection, we can enhance our reasoning abilities and navigate the complexities of the world with greater insight and understanding. The journey of intellectual growth is ongoing, and the pursuit of good thinking is a lifelong endeavor.